What happens when a member of the British royal family faces off against one of America's most seasoned journalists in a battle of wills that nobody saw coming? You won't believe what unfolds when Prince Harry sits down with George Stephanopoulos on Good Morning America, expecting a friendly chat about his charitable work, only to find himself in the crosshairs of the most intense grilling of his media career. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what happens when royal privilege meets journalistic integrity in what can only be described as a complete meltdown on live television. The tension was palpable from the moment Prince Harry walked onto the GMA set. What was supposed to be a promotional appearance for his latest Invictus Games initiative quickly transformed into something far more explosive. Stephanopoulos, known for his no-nonsense approach and decades of experience grilling politicians and celebrities alike, had clearly done his homework. As the cameras rolled and the studio lights blazed, viewers across America were about to witness a confrontation that would leave the Duke of Sussex questioning whether he should have ever agreed to this interview in the first place. The opening pleasantries were brief. Stephanopoulos welcomed Harry with his trademark professional smile, but those who knew the veteran journalist could see something different in his eyes that night. A sharpness, a calculated intensity that suggested this wasn't going to be another softball celebrity interview. Harry, dressed in his usual business casual attire, seemed relaxed initially, flashing that famous Windsor smile as he settled into the guest chair. He had no idea what was coming. "Prince Harry, thank you for joining us tonight," Stephanopoulos began, his voice carrying that familiar authoritative tone that has made him a household name in American journalism. "Let's start with the Invictus Games, but I think our viewers are more interested in something else entirely. Your recent statements about the American media landscape have raised quite a few eyebrows, particularly your criticism of how American journalists operate compared to their British counterparts." The smile on Harry's face flickered. This wasn't the opening he had expected. His media handlers had assured him this would focus on his veteran support work, not venture into the murky waters of press relations. "Well, George, I think there's been some misunderstanding about what I actually said. The context was quite different from how it's been reported." Stephanopoulos leaned forward slightly, a gesture that regular viewers knew signaled his transition from pleasantries to serious journalism. "The context seemed pretty clear when you told the Los Angeles Times that American journalists lack the sophistication and historical understanding that British reporters bring to royal coverage. You specifically mentioned that American media tends to sensationalize rather than inform." That's a direct quote from your interview last month. Harry's posture shifted. The casual confidence he had walked in with was already beginning to crack. "I think you're taking that somewhat out of context, George. What I was trying to express was that there are different journalistic traditions between our countries, and sometimes those differences can lead to misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings," Stephanopoulos repeated, raising his eyebrows. "You called American journalism shallow and suggested that we don't understand the nuances of royal protocol. For someone who has built his new life in America, who has profited considerably from American media platforms, and who regularly appears on American television shows, that seems rather hypocritical, doesn't it?" The word hypocritical hung in the air like a challenge. Harry's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair just a little tighter. This was not going according to plan. I wouldn't characterize it as hypocritical. George, I think I'm uniquely positioned to observe the differences between media cultures, having experienced both extensively. Stephanopoulos wasn't backing down. His decades of experience had taught him to recognize when a guest was on the defensive, and he pressed his advantage. Uniquely positioned. Let's talk about that position. You've made millions from Netflix deals, Spotify contracts, and book sales, all facilitated by what you call shallow American media. You've appeared on Oprah, on late-night talk shows, And now you're here with us. If American journalism is so inferior, why do you keep coming back for more? The studio fell silent except for the low hum of the cameras. Harry's media training had prepared him for difficult questions, but this felt different. This felt personal. Stephanopoulos wasn't just asking questions. He was building a case, methodically dismantling Harry's public persona piece by piece. "I think you're oversimplifying my comments," Harry replied, his voice carrying a slight edge now. The boyish charm that usually served him so well in interviews was gone. "My criticism wasn't about individual journalists or specific outlets. It was about systemic differences in how stories are approached and reported." "Systemic differences?" Stephanopoulos nodded slowly, as if considering the phrase. "Like the systematic way British tabloids invaded your privacy, drove your mother to distraction, and ultimately contributed to the circumstances of her death." Those systemic differences? Harry's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Mentioning his mother was crossing a line, and everyone in the studio knew it. The producers in the control room could sense the shift in energy. The way the interview was moving from professional discourse into something much more volatile. "That's exactly the kind of sensationalism I was talking about," Harry shot back, his voice rising. "Using my mother's death to score cheap points in an interview. That's precisely what I meant about American media lacking nuance." Stephanopoulos remained calm, his expression unchanged. "I'm not sensationalizing anything, Prince Harry. I'm pointing out the irony. You've spent years criticizing British media for their treatment of your family, and rightfully so in many cases. But now you're suggesting that American media, which has largely given you a platform to tell your story without the same level of intrusion, is somehow inferior. It seems like you're criticizing the very system that has allowed you to rebuild your public image." The tension in the studio was unbearable. Harry's carefully constructed media persona was cracking under the pressure of Stephanopoulos' relentless questioning. The veteran journalist had found his target and was dismantling every defense the Duke had prepared. "You don't understand the full picture," Harry said, his frustration clear. "There are complexities to this situation that go beyond simple media criticism. The American press has been generally fair to me, yes, but that doesn't mean I can't observe differences in journalistic standards and approaches." Journalistic standards. Stephanopoulos seized on the phrase immediately. "Let's talk about standards. Is it up to journalistic standards to criticize an entire nation's media while simultaneously profiting from it? Is it standard practice to bite the hand that feeds you while asking for seconds?" The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, and both men knew it. What had started as professional disagreement was becoming something much more personal, much more dangerous for Harry's carefully managed public image. And as viewers would soon discover, this was only the beginning of one of the most explosive television moments of the year. But Stephanopoulos wasn't finished. In fact, he was just getting started. The veteran journalist had spent 30 years in television. From his early days in the Clinton White House to his current position as one of America's most respected news anchors, he had faced down presidents, prime ministers, and world leaders. A disgruntled prince was not going to intimidate him, especially not on his own show. "Let me ask you something else. Prince Harry," Stephanopoulos continued, his voice steady and professional, a tone that somehow made his words even more cutting. "You've spoken extensively about your mental health struggles, and I respect that. But you've also monetized those struggles through book deals, streaming contracts, and speaking engagements. How do you reconcile your criticism of media exploitation with your own willingness to exploit your personal trauma for financial gain?" The question hit Harry like a physical blow. His face flushed red, and for a moment he seemed genuinely speechless. This wasn't just professional criticism anymore. It was a direct attack on his character, his motivations, and his integrity. The carefully crafted narrative he had built around his departure from royal life was being systematically dismantled in real time. "That's completely different," Harry stammered, his composure beginning to crack. Sharing my story to help others who might be struggling is not the same as media exploitation. I've been transparent about my experiences to break down stigma and encourage people to seek help. Stephanopoulos nodded slowly, though his expression remained skeptical. Transparent, yes, but also profitable. Your book advance alone was reportedly worth $40 million. Your Netflix deal is valued at over $100 million. These aren't charitable endeavors, Prince Harry. These are business transactions. You're selling your trauma, your family's secrets, and your royal connections to the highest bidder, while simultaneously criticizing the media for doing exactly the same thing. The studio audience, silent until now, could feel the electricity in the air. This was no longer a celebrity interview. It was a public execution. Harry's hands were visibly shaking, his polished media training slipping away. "You're twisting everything I've said," Harry snapped, his voice rising. "I never claimed I was doing this purely for charitable reasons. But there's a difference between sharing your own story and having it stolen and twisted by tabloids who don't care about the truth." "Is there?" Stephanopoulos shot back immediately. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're doing exactly what you accuse the British tabloids of doing. You're taking private family moments, personal conversations, intimate details about people who can't defend themselves, and you're broadcasting them to the world for money. The only difference is that you've cut out the middleman." Harry's face was now fully flushed, a vein pulsing in his temple. "That's not fair, George. My father and brother have had their chance to speak publicly. They have the entire British establishment backing them up. I've been vilified and silenced for years." "Silenced?" Stephanopoulos' voice carried open incredulity. "You've been on more American television shows in the past 3 years than most celebrities manage in a decade. You've written a best-selling book. You have your own podcast. You're constantly giving interviews. If this is what being silenced looks like, I think most people would sign up for it." The exchange was becoming increasingly heated. Harry was no longer the polished media personality who had walked onto the set. He was defensive, angry, and, most dangerously for his public image, entitled. "You don't understand what it's like," Harry said, his voice now carrying a whining quality that made him sound petulant rather than sympathetic. "You don't know what it's like to have your entire life scrutinized, every word twisted, to be constantly under attack." Stephanopoulos leaned back, smiling for the first time in the interview. But it wasn't a friendly smile, it was the smile of a predator who had just cornered his prey. "Actually, Prince Harry, I do know what that's like. I spent years in the White House during some of the most controversial moments in American political history. I've been attacked by Republicans and Democrats alike. My integrity questioned, my motives challenged, my competence criticized daily. The difference is, I didn't run away to another country and spend years complaining about it on television." The comparison landed with devastating force. Harry had long positioned himself as a victim of circumstances beyond his control. But Stephanopoulos had just made clear that plenty of people endure similar scrutiny without abandoning their responsibilities or monetizing their grievances. "That's completely different," Harry protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "You chose to enter politics. I was born into this. I never had a choice." "Neither did your brother," Stephanopoulos replied instantly. "Neither did your father. Neither did your grandmother before she died. They all faced the same pressures, the same scrutiny, the same challenges, but they stayed and did their duty. You left and wrote a book about how hard it was. So tell me, who really lacks character here?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Harry opened and closed his mouth several times, but no words came out. He was completely out of his depth, unprepared for this level of scrutiny. The prince who had spent years controlling his narrative was discovering what it felt like to lose that control completely. "I think," Harry finally managed, his voice barely a whisper, "that you're being deliberately unfair and hostile. This isn't journalism. This is a personal attack. Stephanopoulos didn't flinch. His stillness carried something almost predatory. This is journalism, Prince Harry. This is accountability. You've spent 3 years appearing on friendly platforms, giving softball interviews, controlling your message. You've forgotten what it feels like to face real scrutiny. And frankly, your reaction to these perfectly legitimate questions tells us everything we need to know about why you really left the royal family. The words hit Harry like a sledgehammer. Viewers could see the exact moment his carefully constructed facade began to collapse. The studio went silent. Harry stared at Stephanopoulos with a mixture of shock, rage, and something dangerously close to panic. His media training, his strategy, his American reinvention, everything was crumbling live on air. You want to know why I really left? Harry's voice trembled with fury. You want the real reason? It's because of people like you. Journalists who think they have the right to dissect every aspect of someone's life, to judge decisions you couldn't possibly understand, to act as if you know better than the people actually living through these experiences. Stephanopoulos remained calm, hands folded, expression unchanged. So it wasn't about racism in the royal family. It wasn't about your mental health. It wasn't about protecting your wife and children. It was about avoiding accountability, about not wanting to face difficult questions. The accusation landed like gasoline on fire. Harry's composure completely evaporated, and for the first time in the interview, viewers saw the man behind the carefully crafted public persona. Gone was the sympathetic victim of royal protocol and media intrusion. In his place sat an entitled, angry figure furious at being challenged. Accountability? Harry practically shouted, his voice echoing through the studio. Accountability to whom? To you? To people who have never lived a day in my shoes? I don't owe you or anyone else an explanation for the choices I've made to protect my family and my sanity. Actually, you do, Stephanopoulos replied, his voice maddeningly steady. You owe explanations to the British people who supported the royal family financially. You owe explanations to the American people whose media platforms you've used to rebuild your image. And you certainly owe explanations to the family members you've publicly criticized and embarrassed for profit. Harry stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward with the force of his movement. The sudden action sent a ripple of tension through the studio crew. Viewers could sense that something unprecedented was about to happen. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he said, his voice so loud it was almost certainly distorting the audio levels. This aggressive, hostile interrogation style that passes for journalism in America. You're not seeking truth. You're seeking ratings. Stephanopoulos allowed a slight smile to play at the corners of his mouth. And you're not seeking to help people with their mental health struggles, Prince Harry. You're seeking to rehabilitate your image while making millions of dollars. At least I'm honest about what I'm doing. The comparison was devastating. Harry was being exposed not just as hypocritical, but as fundamentally dishonest about his own motivations. His American media strategy had been built on presenting himself as a victim, courageously speaking truth to power. But under real scrutiny, that narrative was unraveling. I don't have to listen to this, Harry said, his voice shaking with rage. I don't have to sit here and be attacked by someone who clearly came into this interview with an agenda. This isn't journalism, it's character assassination. No, Prince Harry, Stephanopoulos replied, standing slowly to match his guest's posture. This is what journalism looks like when the subject can't control the narrative. This is what accountability feels like when you can't buy your way out of difficult questions. And your reaction right now is proving every point I've made about why you really left the royal family. Harry's face was crimson, his fists clenched at his sides. My reaction? My reaction is to being ambushed by a journalist who has no interest in fair reporting. You've twisted everything I've said, taken my words out of context, and turned what should have been a discussion about helping veterans into a personal attack. I've asked you direct questions about your own public statements and actions, Stephanopoulos countered. If those questions feel like personal attacks, perhaps you should examine why your own words sound so damaging when repeated back to you. That was the breaking point. Harry's composure shattered, and viewers witnessed something never before seen on American television. A member of the British royal family having a complete public meltdown. You know what, George? This interview is over. I don't need this, and I don't need you. I came here in good faith to discuss important work, and you've turned it into a circus. The only person turning this into a circus is you, Stephanopoulos replied calmly. I asked legitimate questions about your public statements and business dealings. Your inability to answer them professionally says everything about your character and your fitness for public life. Harry stormed toward the edge of the set, his microphone pack still strapped on, forgotten in his fury. My fitness for public life? I've done more for charity and public service than you ever will. I served my country in Afghanistan while you were sitting safely behind a desk, asking politicians softball questions. The remark was meant to be devastating, but Stephanopoulos didn't flinch. You served your country, yes, for 10 weeks in a heavily protected base with more security than most soldiers ever see. And then you left that service just like you left everything else when it became inconvenient or difficult. Harry spun around, face contorted with rage. How dare you minimize my military service? I put my life on the line for my country while you were probably at cocktail parties in Washington. Your military service was admirable, Stephanopoulos acknowledged evenly. But it doesn't give you a lifetime pass from criticism, and it doesn't excuse your behavior since then. You can't invoke 10 weeks in Afghanistan every time someone questions your multi-million-dollar media deals. Harry's hands shook violently now, his voice rising to a disturbing pitch. This is unbelievable. This is exactly the toxic media environment I was talking about. You've proven my point better than I ever could have. Actually, Stephanopoulos said, his voice calm as ever, I think I've proven my point. You can handle softball interviews with friendly hosts, but you can't handle real journalism. You can criticize the media when you're in control of the message, but you fall apart when faced with genuine accountability. By now, Harry was at the edge of the set, fumbling with his microphone while technicians tried to help him. I'm done with this farce, he declared. I'm done with journalists who think ambush tactics and personal attacks are professional behavior. And I think American viewers are done with entitled celebrities who believe they deserve special treatment, Stephanopoulos replied coldly. Thank you for proving exactly what kind of person you really are, Prince Harry. Harry ripped free of the equipment and marched toward the exit, his face still flushed with anger. You can edit this however you want, George, but people will see through your agenda. They'll see you turned what should have been a respectful conversation into a hit job. We broadcast live, Prince Harry, Stephanopoulos called after him. There's no editing. What people saw was exactly what happened. A man who can dish out criticism but can't take it, who can attack others but can't defend himself, and who runs away when faced with the scrutiny he's been avoiding for years. Harry paused at the studio door, hand on the handle, as though he might turn back. But instead, he shook his head and walked out, leaving behind one of the most explosive television moments in recent memory. Stephanopoulos turned back to the camera, composure fully intact despite the chaos. Well, that was certainly illuminating, he told viewers. Sometimes the most revealing interviews are the ones where the guest reveals more than they intended. We'll be right back after this break. As the studio lights dimmed, the crew stood in stunned silence. They had just witnessed the collapse of a carefully constructed public image. Prince Harry's American media strategy had imploded live on air, and there would be no coming back from this spectacular display of entitlement and thin skin.